Hey there, friends, it's Nick. Right, let's talk about conflict because we want to build conflict into our stories. That's technique number 4. One of the things I see when I'm working with clients, whether they're influencers or businesses, is this general trend towards narratives where everything's going up. You know, the graphs are all going up, everything's fine, all our projects are successful. You know, we're all having a great time. And that's totally understandable that businesses want to project that kind of narrative. But it does really rob us. It robs you of the chance to build a connection with your audience. Because if I've talked about change as being the kind of the fundamental level of story, the fundamental atomic level. But change is best driven, best understood when two things bump up against each other. So I'll give you a quick example. If I'm telling the story of how I left IBM and started my own business, it's a story that I've probably told 100 times in the last 20 years. I can tell it in a couple of ways. On one hand, I can tell it as kind of a mythic sort of story, where I'm the guy who I had a good job, but I risked it all. I left my job and I started a business and I succeeded. In other words, everything's on the up. And, 2 weeks after I left, I was earning more than I'd ever earned before. And I can tell that story, and it's fundamentally true. The facts are true. I did leave IBM. I did start a business. I was earning twice as much money as I'd ever earned before, or, more money than I'd ever earned before. But what it lacks is a sense of conflict. And because it lacks conflict, it lacks drama, right? So let's tell it in a different way. Let's say in the summer of 2002, summer of 1997, I was incredibly stressed. I was working on a project for the IBM's new media lab in the UK. We were doing a massive rollout of websites for a big international company. It was 11 countries, 13 languages, and I was in charge of getting it all delivered. And I was working like a dog. I was working... it wasn't a 5-day week, it was a 6 or 7-day week, long hours. And it was the kind of stress that I felt when I woke up, that kind of pulsing headache, stress headache that you might have had. Anyway, I had no way out. I was trapped because it was a good job. But what actually happened was I went in on one Monday morning and I sat down at my desk and I worked in a room that had no windows. I sat down at my desk and I looked at all these piles of papers and I felt a kind of visceral dread. I felt I can't be in here anymore. And I stood up and I walked to my boss's office. It was early in the morning. It was like 7:30 on a Monday morning, but he was in because he was in the same situation. We were all working hard. And I knocked on his door and I told him I was done. And I had no plan. I had no offers. I had nowhere to go. I had, relatively speaking, relatively little money, because one of the things that was true then about IBM, I don't know whether it's still true now, is that they paid you in advance. When you started at IBM, you got a month's pay on your first day, which is like Christmas, obviously, because you probably got the last payment from your previous job at the same time, which had happened to me. But when you leave, your last paycheck was already, weeks or a month ago, whatever. Anyway, I vividly remember a meeting 2 days later. I went up to see this client I was working for, and we had a meeting scheduled every week, basically. But in this meeting, I got to say to her, "Listen, I've handed in my notice. I'm off." And she was absolutely lovely. She said, "Oh, Nick, we're so sorry. We're going to lose you from this project because you've been so instrumental in this. But obviously, you must be going somewhere amazing because you're leaving this great job." And I felt about this big. When she said that, because I had no plan. I was the farthest thing from that kind of mythic figure that you could imagine, because I was really running away, right? I was running away, and I blustered and said I was building my own thing, or I can't really remember, something. But the truth was I had nowhere to go, and everything that happened after that was unplanned. And yes, it's true that what happened was, in order to find the job that I wanted to do, I ended up learning that I had to build it. And it's also true that I immediately got some consultancy work, almost immediately got some consultancy work, which paid very well. And in fact, that particular client went to IBM and got them to effectively waive part of my contract where I'd said I wouldn't work for any IBM clients for 3 years or whatever. They got IBM to waive that because they wanted me to do a particular task. But do you see the difference? Do you see how the fundamental points of each story are the same, but the one where I launched off and started my own business and got successful has so much less resonance than the truth? And that's because the fuller story, the story with conflict in it, shows you something about the person I was and therefore tells you something about the person I am. And I probably told that story 100 times in the last 20 years, and you can tweak the details depending on your audience, but it's a true story because we're story hackers, we're telling true stories, right? But the conflict gives it its edge because the person you're talking to or the people you're talking to have all had those experiences. We've all felt stress. We've all known what we were doing. And because I went through that and I found a way through, the next part of the story becomes a lot more interesting to people. I hope that makes sense. That's technique number 4. That's a longer video than usual, but I think it's really useful. So go to your stories. Look for the places where you can bring out the conflict. It doesn't have to be, fisticuffs. It's very often internal, but it can really help you bring stories home and resonate with your audience. Thanks very much. Bye now.